Medieval armor didn't work like it does in movies. It wasn't a clunky iron costume that made people helpless, and it also wasn't a magic shield that made a knight basically invincible. Real armor was a practical system built for one job: keep you alive long enough to keep fighting. That meant layers, smart shaping, and a lot of small details: padding underneath, plates that overlap like shingles, helmets that balance protection with vision, and designs meant to make blows slide off instead of hitting straight on. And once you understand that, a lot of famous scenes stop making sense. Swords don't casually slice through plate, knights don't need cranes to get on a horse in battle gear, and just hit the chest harder isn't how armored combat worked. The truth is more interesting. Armor changed over time. It depended on money and role, and it forced fighters to change tactics. Aim for gaps, use grappling, use weapons made for impact, and fight as a team. In this video, we're breaking down how medieval armor actually worked in real battles, without the movie myths. Number 1. The real job of armor. People talk about medieval armor like it was one fixed outfit that every knight wore the same way. But armor changed a lot from the 1000s to the 1500s, and it also changed by region, budget, and job. The core idea stayed the same though. Armor wasn't magic, it was risk control. It tried to stop the most common injuries first, reduce how badly a hit could mess you up, and keep you fighting longer. That meant 3 basic tricks working together: coverage, deflection, and shock control. Coverage is the obvious one. If there's metal over the body, the weapon has to get through it. Deflection is just as important, especially with plate. Curved surfaces, angled edges, and ridges are there to make blows slide off instead of landing square. Shock control is the part movies usually ignore. Even if a weapon doesn't cut through, the energy still has to go somewhere. So the armor system has to spread that force over a wider area, slow it down, and keep it from focusing on one small point. That's why armor is a system, not just shiny metal. The metal is only the top layer. Under it you have padding, straps, and a fitted foundation that turns hard impacts into something the body can survive. Another big reality check. Armor is always a trade. More protection usually means more weight, more heat, and more cost. So most historical armor was made to match a threat level. A person guarding a gate, an infantryman on campaign, and a tournament fighter might all wear armor, but it wouldn't be the same kind. Even a rich knight didn't always wear full plate everywhere. Sometimes it was a helmet, plus a good padded coat and some mail. Sometimes it was a full harness for a battle where heavy cavalry mattered. That's why the movie idea of armor equals slow, clumsy, and basically invincible misses the point. Real armor aimed for protected enough to do the job, while still letting you walk, ride, breathe, see, and use your hands. If it stopped you from functioning, it failed at the one thing it was supposed to do: keep you effective in a fight, not turn you into a statue. And once you look at armor like a practical tool instead of a costume, the details start making a lot more sense, especially the parts you never see on screen. Number 2, the layer underneath. The most important piece of armor is often the one people don't notice: the padded garment under the metal. You'll see a lot of names depending on time and place, but the general idea is simple. A thick, fitted, quilted layer, usually linen on the outside, stuffed or layered inside, shaped to the body. People often call it a gambeson, an akiton, or later an arming doublet. That layer does a few jobs at once. First, it makes wearing metal possible for more than a couple minutes. Bare metal against skin is a bad idea. It pinches, rubs, and turns every movement into a bruise. The padded layer keeps the metal from biting into you, and it stops straps from cutting into the body. Second, it manages impact. A lot of blows that look minor on armor are still heavy hits. Without padding, even a non-penetrating strike can leave you with deep bruises, cracked ribs, or a shock effect that makes you useless. With padding, the energy spreads out and slows down. Third, it's a mounting system. Medieval plate isn't simply worn like a jacket. Many parts are tied to the underlying garment with cords called arming points. Those points connect specific pieces, like the upper arm defenses or thigh defenses, so they hang in the right place and move with your joints. That's a huge reason good armor looks almost alive in museum reconstructions. It's not swinging on loose belts, it's anchored to a tailored foundation. This is also where fit matters more than raw weight. A poorly fitted harness can be lighter and still feel worse than a heavier harness that matches the wearer. If the weight hangs from the shoulders wrong, you'll feel it immediately. If the padding bunches in the elbows or behind the knees, every step turns into friction and fatigue. Now add the heat factor. Armor is a workout in a metal shell, and the padded layer is basically insulation. That sounds awful, and it can be, but people managed it with common sense routines. Opening the visor when possible, taking breaks, drinking water, wearing layers appropriate to climate, and sometimes choosing lighter coverage for long marches. It also explains a major myth: the idea that a knight just clanked around all day in full plate. On campaign, a lot of the time armor was carried, not worn or worn partially. When it was time to fight, the foundation layer was already on, and the metal pieces went on over it. That's why an armored person could suit up faster than you'd expect, and still move like a human instead of a robot. Number 3, mail wasn't outdated. When people picture medieval armor, they often jump straight to full plate, but for a long stretch of the Middle Ages, mail, chainmail, was the main defense for anyone serious about fighting. And it wasn't a cheap backup plan. Good mail is labor-heavy and expensive. It's made from thousands of metal rings, and in many periods, the best mail used riveted rings, not just rings squeezed shut. Rivets keep the rings from popping open under stress, which is exactly what you want when a blade edge is trying to force its way through. Mail is extremely good against cuts. If you swing a sword at a riveted mail shirt over decent padding, the rings resist the edge, and the padding takes the impact. That doesn't mean it's comfortable, but it means you usually don't get sliced open the way movies show. The real weakness of mail is concentrated force, strong thrusts, heavy spikes, narrow points, and crushing hits that don't need to cut to cause damage. That's why mail is almost always paired with padding, and why you see extra reinforcement in vulnerable areas, thicker layers, additional mail panels, or later, plates added over key spots. This is also where early mixed armor shows up. The transition from mostly mail to more plate wasn't a sudden invention, it was an upgrade path. People added plates to answer specific problems. You see coat of plates, plates riveted inside a fabric or leather outer layer, covering the torso to protect against spears, lances, and heavy blows. You see splinted armor on arms or legs, where narrow plates are attached along the limb. You see brigandines later on, which are basically lots of small overlapping plates riveted inside a tough fabric shell, giving good protection with flexibility and easier repair. What matters here is that medieval armor makers weren't chasing fashion for fun. They were responding to what actually hurt people in battle. Thrusting weapons, polearms, strong missile weapons, and the sheer chaos of close combat. Another movie myth is that mail makes you slow because it's so heavy. Mail can be heavy, but the real issue is how it hangs. A long mail shirt puts weight on the shoulders and can feel tiring over time. A well-made, properly belted mail setup spreads some weight to the hips, and it moves with you. Still, it's different from plate. Mail is flexible protection. It follows your body and absorbs damage through the ring structure and the padding underneath. Plate is rigid protection. It wants to deflect and distribute. Once plate coverage improves, you start to see mail shift roles. It doesn't disappear. It becomes gap coverage. Under the arms, at the neck, behind the knees, inside the elbows. Places where solid plates would block movement. Those little mail sections, sometimes called voiders, are the quiet reason a full harness is as protective as it looks, because joints are where real fights target you. So if you take one idea from this section, it's this. Medieval armor wasn't a straight line from bad to good. Mail stayed relevant because it solved problems that plate alone couldn't solve without sacrificing mobility. Number 4, plate was wearable engineering. Full plate armor, what historians often call a harness, is one of the best examples of practical engineering in pre-modern Europe. Not because it's fancy, but because it's built around movement. Every big joint has a solution. Shoulders, elbows, wrists, hips, knees, ankles. The pieces aren't random. They're shaped and connected, so the body can do normal actions while staying covered. You'll hear a lot of part names, but the logic is straightforward. The torso is protected by a breastplate and backplate, sometimes with a separate placard or reinforcing plate in front. Below that, you often have folds, overlapping horizontal lames, protecting the waist and belly while letting you bend. The hips and upper thighs may have tassets hanging from the folds. Arms use a shoulder defense, pauldron or spalder, an upper arm tube, vambrace section, an elbow cup, cooter, and forearm protection. Legs use thigh plates, cuisses, knee cops, polans, and shin plates, greaves, with articulated foot defenses, sabatons in some cases. Hands are covered by gauntlets with plates that slide over each other, because you need finger movement more than you need a solid block. Helmets also evolved toward better coverage with better vision management. Bassinets with visors, sallets with bavor plates for the throat, and later close helmets depending on the era. The key myth to kill here is the can't move idea. A full harness was heavy, but it wasn't ridiculous. Many complete battle harnesses land in a range that's roughly comparable to what modern soldiers sometimes carry in gear, and the weight is distributed around the body rather than hanging like a backpack. More importantly, it's balanced. Good plate puts a lot of weight on the hips through the waist structure and supportive belts, not just on the shoulders. That's why someone in a well-fitted harness can walk, kneel, get up, climb onto a horse, and use weapons effectively. Another myth is the crane to mount a horse story. It's true that tournament armor could be extremely heavy and specialized, and that kind of gear could limit movement on purpose because it's designed for a specific style of impact. But battle armor was meant for real conditions. If you needed a crane to get onto your horse, you'd be in trouble the moment anything went wrong on the field. Articulation is where the craftsmanship really shows. Plates overlap like shingles. Sliding rivets allow movement while keeping coverage. Fluting, those grooves you see on some German armor, isn't just decoration. It can add stiffness without adding much weight, kind of like ridges in modern sheet metal design. Edges are rolled or reinforced to stop them from cracking and to reduce the chance of a weapon biting in. And the surfaces are shaped to glance off hits. A flat plate is easier to penetrate than a curved one, because curves spread force and create angles that turn direct strikes into glancing strikes. This is also why a sword cuts through plate scenes are off. A cutting sword is working against geometry, hardness, and angle. Real plate harnesses were built to make the easiest kind of attack, big slashing swings, the least effective kind of attack. That doesn't mean plate makes you untouchable. It means it forces the fight into different methods, finding gaps, controlling distance, and using tools meant to concentrate force. Number 5. Weapons versus armor was tactical. Once armor gets good, the fight doesn't stop, it changes. Movies often show armored combat as people wildly swinging swords at each other's chest plates until something dramatic happens. Real armored fighting is more controlled and more technical because the obvious targets don't work. Against solid plate, a standard sword slash is mostly wasted effort. So fighters adjust in a few predictable ways. One approach is precision targeting. Aim for openings. No matter how good armor is, it has joints and access points, armpits, inside elbows, visor slits, neck edges, groin area, behind knees. Armor makers tried to cover these with mail, extra plates, and clever overlaps, but you can't seal a human body inside a rigid shell and still move. That's why armored technique focuses on controlling the opponent's weapon and body position, so those openings appear, even briefly. Another approach is changing how you use familiar weapons. With a sword, you see half-swording, gripping the blade with a gloved hand to turn the sword into a short spear-like tool for accurate thrusting. You're not doing this because it looks cool. You're doing it because it gives you control and lets you drive the point into a gap if one opens. You also see the sword used for leverage in grappling, pushing, hooking, and binding, rather than trying to cut through steel. Some fighting manuals show techniques where the sword is used almost like a pry bar to break posture and create a quick opening. Then there are weapons that are simply better matched to armored opponents. Polearms, like the poleaxe, halberd, and various spear forms, are common because they give reach, control, and concentrated force. A poleaxe in particular is basically a toolbox. It can have a hammer face for impact, a spike for penetrating gaps, and a hook for pulling or destabilizing. Maces and warhammers exist for a reason too. A mace doesn't need to slice. It needs to land heavy force on a small area, which can overwhelm the body through the armor, damage joints, or crack less reinforced pieces. Even when a plate isn't pierced, a strong, concentrated strike can still disrupt the wearer. The third big reality is grappling. Once armor is common, close-range wrestling becomes more important, not less. If you can't easily injure someone through the main plates, controlling them becomes a path to victory. That can mean throwing them off balance, pinning them, forcing their helmet out of alignment, or trapping their weapon so a finishing tool can be used. That finishing tool is often a dagger designed for armor work, narrow, stiff, and made for thrusting into small gaps. This isn't about gore, it's about mechanics. Armor pushes combat toward tools and techniques that concentrate force or exploit openings. That's why knight versus knight fights in reality could look less like wild swordplay and more like a rough, fast blend of weapon control, grappling, and targeted strikes. Even the way armies fought reflects this. When armored men fought in groups, formations mattered, because multiple opponents create angles you can't cover. The safest armor in the world won't help if you're surrounded and pulled in different directions. So armor didn't replace tactics. It raised the threshold of what worked, and it rewarded discipline and teamwork. Number 6. Arrows, bolts, and the truth. One of the loudest myths is that arrows either bounce off armor like nothing, or else punch through full plate like it's cardboard. Reality sits in the middle, and it depends on details people skip. Distance, angle, head shape, draw weight, armor quality, and where the arrow hits. Start with plate. A good breastplate is designed to defeat common missile threats by being hard, shaped, and angled. If an arrow hits a curved plate at an angle, it often glances off or fails to bite in. If it hits straight on at close range, with a strong bow and a hardened, narrow head, it has a better chance. But even then, penetration isn't guaranteed, especially against late medieval plate that's thick where it matters. This is why archers were terrifying without needing magical armor-piercing powers. They could still injure horses, hit less armored troops, strike the face, neck, limbs, or gaps, and they could overload shields and stamina. Also, a battlefield isn't a shooting range. Visibility is messy, people move, arrows hit odd angles, and armor isn't evenly thick everywhere. Now mail. Mail overpadding can stop many arrow cuts and reduce penetration, but a strong shot with a narrow point can push rings apart, or drive through in ways a sword edge can't. Crossbows add another layer. A heavy crossbow can deliver a strong bolt with high force, and at short ranges it can threaten armor more seriously, especially if the armor is mid-quality, or the hit is lucky. But the same rules still apply. Angle and placement matter, and the best armor is built to resist. When firearms arrive, the relationship shifts again. Early handguns are inconsistent and slow, but over time guns push armor makers toward thicker plates, especially on the chest. This leads to proofing, where some breastplates were tested against a shot, leaving a dent that showed it survived. That doesn't mean the wearer was safe from every gun. It means people were in an arms race, trying to buy time against improving weapons. And once you make armor thick enough to resist more shots, weight becomes a serious issue, so you start seeing selective heavy armor for certain troops and lighter or partial armor for others. Another myth is the idea that helmets made you blind and helpless. Helmets reduce vision and hearing, yes, but designs try to balance that with survival. Many visors can be lifted. Many helmets have airflow holes and shaped eye openings. On a battlefield, a person might keep the visor up when not in immediate contact, then drop it when things get dangerous. It's the same practical thinking you see everywhere else in armor design. Trade comfort and awareness for protection when the threat is highest, then open up when you can. The big takeaway is not arrows are useless or armor is useless. It's that medieval warfare was a constant contest between offense and defense, and armor performance was situational. The same longbow that is deadly against an unarmored or lightly armored man can be far less decisive against a well-armored target at the wrong angle and range. That's why archers were typically used as part of a combined system. Missiles to disrupt, slow, and injure, while men-at-arms and infantry formations finished fights with close control of ground and bodies. Number 7. Wearing it in the real world. A lot of movie myths come from pretending armor is worn like a superhero suit that someone just throws on in 10 seconds and then keeps on forever. Real armor takes time, routine, and help, and it's usually managed in stages. The foundation garment goes on first, the padded layer that everything ties to. Then, certain pieces can be strapped on by the wearer, but many setups are faster and better with assistance, especially the backplate, some arm defenses, and anything that needs careful alignment. That's why squires and armor servants mattered. It wasn't about pampering. It was about efficiency and correct fit. If a strap is twisted, a buckle is wrong, or a plate is misaligned, movement gets worse and gaps appear. Once the armor is on, you can function, but you're dealing with heat, sweat, and fatigue. Metal doesn't breathe. Padding holds warmth. So medieval fighters had to pace themselves and make choices. On long marches, you often don't wear the full harness. You carry it on a pack animal or wagon, or you wear only the parts that make sense if trouble shows up suddenly, like a helmet and a torso defense, then add the rest when contact is expected. And even in battle, you'll see evidence that people adjusted, opening visors between clashes, removing certain pieces when the situation changed, and replacing damaged straps quickly. Maintenance is a constant reality. Armor rusts, leather straps stretch and crack, rivets loosen. A harness is full of moving parts, so it needs inspection and repair. That's why armor came with spare straps, spare buckles, and the skills to fix problems. A dented plate might still be usable, but if it interferes with movement at a joint, it becomes dangerous. Fit is also a bigger deal than people assume. Plate armor is sized to a person the way a tailored suit is. A harness made for one man can be worn by another only if their proportions are close. Otherwise, the articulation points don't match the joints, and that's where injuries and exhaustion show up. This also explains why armor is loud and obvious is only half true. Yes, metal pieces can clink, but a well-fitted harness with proper padding and snug straps is quieter than the cartoon version. Noise usually comes from loose gear, badly adjusted plates, dangling straps, or cheap construction. Real battle gear is tightened because loose gear gets you hurt. There's also the mobility test people love to argue about. Can someone in full plate get up from the ground? Yes, assuming the armor fits and its battle harness, not an extremely heavy tournament setup. The motion is different because you're managing rigid plates, but the joints are built for bending, kneeling, and rising. The bigger problem on a battlefield isn't, can you get up? It's, can you get up while someone is trying to control you? Which brings you back to tactics, teamwork, and why armored combat often includes grappling and group pressure. Armor improves your survival odds. It doesn't remove the need to stay upright, aware, and supported by your side. Number 8. Who wore what and why? It's easy to get stuck on the richest, fanciest armor in museums and assume that's what medieval soldiers looked like in general. In reality, armor coverage across an army was uneven. Full, high-quality plate harnesses were expensive because they required skilled labor, good steel, time, and precise fitting. Wealthy nobles and professional men-at-arms had the best gear more consistently, but even then, a lot of equipment was acquired over years. Adding pieces, upgrading, replacing after damage, inheriting parts, and buying second-hand. Meanwhile, many soldiers wore what they could afford, or what their lord provided. This is where munition armor comes in. Mass-produced armor made in standardized sizes for infantry and city troops. It might not have the same perfect fit or fine finish as custom harnesses, but it gave real protection at a scale that mattered. Brigandines are a good example of armor that sits between worlds. Protective, flexible, and easier to produce and maintain than a fully shaped plate harness. A brigandine can look like a cloth jacket from the outside, but inside it's packed with overlapping plates riveted in place. It's not a costume choice. It's a practical solution for people who need solid defense without the full cost of a custom harness. You also see a lot of partial sets. A helmet plus a breastplate, or a mail shirt plus a coat of plates, or a jack, a thick padded coat reinforced in key areas. This variety is normal. War isn't one clean duel at noon on an empty field. It's raids, sieges, ambushes, marches, bad weather, and long stretches where you need to be ready without exhausting yourself. Armor reflects that messy reality. Another detail people miss is how much armor style ties to production centers and trade. Northern Italy, parts of Germany, and other regions became known for armor making, with workshops producing different looks and technical preferences. Some designs emphasize smooth curves and compact shapes. Others emphasize sharper ridges and fluting, but the goal stays consistent: protect vital areas, keep joints working, and manage weight. You can even see the bureaucracy of war in armor. Armies kept inventories. Cities bought sets for militias. Rulers issued regulations about what equipment soldiers were expected to have. Armor was an industry with supply chains: iron, charcoal, water-powered hammers in some places, skilled smiths, leather workers for straps, textile workers for padded garments. And because it was valuable, armor was maintained, repaired, and reused. That's why battlefield finds and written records often talk about captured armor being redistributed, or damaged harnesses being fixed rather than thrown away. When you put all of this together, medieval armor stops looking like fantasy gear and starts looking like a practical answer to practical problems, shaped by money, technology, and the threats people actually faced, right down to the workshop stamp marks that identified which maker stood behind the quality.